So for those of you who are in the webinar now, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for taking some time out of your day. Seems like days are getting shorter and more packed with one Zoom meeting after another. So I appreciate you taking an hour out of today to join us for our webinar. My name is Jim Williams. I'm the CMO of Brandmaker. And today we're going to be wrapping up our webinar series, or at least our webinar series with Forrester, that we call Plan Smart, Pivot Fast. On the second of our two webinars, we're going to focus on the new rules of marketing planning. Before I jump into it, introduce my co-presenters, I'm delighted to be with. I just wanted to provide a little bit of context for today's webinar, some guidance for the webinar for audience members, and then I'm going to get out of the way and let the Forrester analysts do their thing. But first is a little bit about why we're talking about this today. So if you didn't notice, the last couple of years has been a bit topsy-turvy in the business of marketing. It's been topsy-turvy for everyone, but if you're in marketing, you probably have had to scrap plans to kind of change your strategy, certainly to shift dollars. You might have to be experimenting with new channels, new ways to reach people. You might have to change your messaging and your tone. In short, it's been nothing but a series of pivots, as we say. And actually pivoting plans, if in your marketing, is not that easy to do, especially if your plans are locked up in PowerPoints and spreadsheets and Google Docs and Slack messages and SharePoint sites and everything else. A number of places that are disconnected, fragmented, isolated, snapshot. Trying to suddenly change that and get everyone on the same page, it can be really challenging. And so that's why we're talking about this topic, about plan smart and pivot fast, because we are moving quickly from what was considered, episodic planning or periodic planning to almost we're getting into the norm of continuous planning, continuous planning. That creates real challenges. So we've been exploring this topic. Certainly exploring best practices around planning and getting people aligned on the plan with experts, and those certainly include the two folks I'm here with today. We're going to dig into how to make changes on the fly to marketing plans, best way to do that with Forrester, and I'm really excited for it. We'll have plenty of examples to include. Now, a couple other quick things, and then I'll hand over. First is Brandmaker. Who is Brandmaker? For those of you unfamiliar with us, Brandmaker is a provider of marketing operations and marketing resource management solutions, software solutions. It's actually the combination of several brands. Brandmaker is one, Allocadia, for those of you who are familiar with Allocadia, financial management and budgeting, and finally Hive9. Three companies have come together to focus on this space, this marketing operations software space. Obviously, we provide solutions to help people do planning, predicting outcomes, financial management, execution, work management, and finally measurement, which is all part of this. Think about it as software to help you run the business of marketing versus just execute a marketing campaign. That's why we're talking about this. If you're interested in those solutions, I'd encourage you to stick around after the Q&A. Today, we're gonna do what I like to call affectionately the backstage pass. If you want to see how these solutions work, stick around. We'll provide a 15-minute overview of our products that help facilitate planning, financial management, execution, and measurement. Otherwise, enjoy the presentation. You can ask questions. Please use the Q&A feature. That's where we'll be asking questions. We may interject those questions during the course of the presentation. Depends on how we're doing, moving through it, how much time we have. So go ahead and ask your questions there, and we'll make sure we get to them before the end of the webinar, if not during the webinar. And I think that covers everything. So why don't I pipe down and turn it over to the experts. I'd like to just have Rainey Salahi and Erin Boland introduce themselves and then take it away, please.
Certainly. Thanks, Jim. My name is Rainey Salahi. I am with Forrester, and I work in our marketing executive services, working with marketing leaders and CMOs on strategy, planning, transformation initiatives, and really thinking through how to pivot, which is really the topic of our conversation today. And so I am joined by Erin.
Thanks, Rainey. Thanks, Jim. Hi, I'm Erin Bolin, and I am one of the analysts in the demand and ABM service here at Forrester. And I am excited to be back at Forrester. I actually left a couple of years ago and did a stint back in practitioner land. So some of this is certainly very relevant and a recent experience for me, having had to pivot, adjust plans, and reassess my tactic mix in light of some of the changes that have happened. So from a research perspective, I work with demand leaders on program planning, execution, optimization, and also measurement. So excited to be here today.
All right, with that, we will get started. If you had attended the first session, we will have a few pieces to sort of connect back to marketing planning to really relate the content between that. But for just the beginning part of this, we wanted to just sort of have a level set with some of the terminology that we're using, so we're all familiar with kind of the areas that we'll be discussing. And so this is really going to go through just a 5-step process of how we think about campaigns within Forrester. And very often marketing leaders can easily get confused when we start campaign planning, because there are clear boundaries between our company strategy, our marketing planning, and then the campaigns that we have to take place. So in part 1 of this Plan Smart and Pivot Fast series, Marcia from our Forrester service had really focused in on marketing planning. And so for today's session, we're going to take that snapshot of those marketing objectives, our financial and business objectives, and our target audiences that really form that annual plan, and use it as an input on how we pivot to campaigns, programs, and tactics. So we're starting with this very first one, which is, our campaigns. When we think of a campaign within Forrester, it's focused on customer needs. It is not necessarily focused on our products, but rather the business problems that your customers need to solve. When we look at that in a second component, it's also composed of program families. And within each of those program families are a collection of programs and tactics that we would execute against. Each of these programs is designed to have a very specific outcome that's aligned to campaign goals, which map back to the marketing plan, the marketing strategy, and the business objectives of the company. And then we really look at a campaign as a long-lived initiative. It's really intended to run at least a year and usually longer. And that's because campaigns are really focused on customer problems and your company offerings that you're addressing. It's not something that would really change frequently. So already the definition of campaign is sounding a little bit different as I'm speaking about it. So we're going to continue to step through that a little bit. And that campaign is really that result of collaboration across product, marketing, and sales functions. Campaigns really are most successful when these functions have all aligned and we have really worked together to make them happen. So here I'm bringing this to life. And so this is our Forrester campaign framework. And now you're starting to see some familiarity of demand programs, of customer engagement, building awareness and a brand through reputation. All of that is included as part of our campaign framework. Our campaign framework is really meant to facilitate a campaign theme of what your company sells across a range of markets. It integrates reputation, demand, engagement, and enablement, as you see in those green arrows, across the buyer's journey and that post-sale customer lifecycle. Implementing this type of framework actually requires careful planning, content strategy, collaboration across reputation and demand activities, and collaboration with our sales and product colleagues. Additionally, when we think about implementing this type of campaign framework, it also entails our budget allocations, our measurements of how we're measuring individual program performance to the overall campaign performance, and even considers organizational considerations for the CMO as we look across. So this is a really good visualization that when we talk about a campaign, typically we're talking about a much larger initiative that's an umbrella that allows these 4 different types of programs and program families to work across the marketing organization. To further help just define this, and this is a great kind of takeaway slide, is that campaign is more theme-based and is really driving that go-to-market strategy. There's 4 program families as part of the campaign framework, and we will be talking about reputation, demand, engagement, and enablement, predominantly demand. And Erin will cover that as we go into this a little bit further. And then in each of those program families, there are programs. And each program has a very clear objective to a very defined audience and has that integrated mix of tactics that are both inbound, outbound, digital, in person when we can. And then the tactics are really what we drive interactions. Tactics are a webinar, an ROI calculator. It usually consists of a message, a way to deliver it through email, through an online platform, and consists of some type of asset type. The reason why we're spending a little bit of time on these definitions is because we're really starting to then kind of go into that next piece of when we think about campaigns, programs, tactics. You know, ultimately, campaigns are really a central part to every marketing, planning, and execution toolkit. So when we start to encounter some of those external market or even internal changes, that's when things begin to change. And so for today's discussion, we really want to spend some time on what are the different dimensions of disruptions that can occur that impact our campaigns, programs, and tactics. And we really want to provide some guidance and how to really rapidly re-engineer to remain focused, relevant, and aligned to those overall business goals, which those are even sometimes changing. And so this really gives us a very clear four-step process. And change is inevitable. Just as Jim touched upon, we've obviously been in a great deal of change over the last 2 years with the pandemic, and what have marketers had to rethink and really align to. There's been a tremendous amount of change about buyer attitudes, behaviors, and all of this has important implications for each of us as marketers. And so we're always looking to build very long-lasting relationship with our prospective buyers and customers. And we're really looking to achieve very specific business and internal goals. And so what type of response is really required when there is chaotic market or business events? And there's different natures of disruption. A major disruption can really impact the entire focus of the company, such as a pandemic. A moderate or minor disruption can impact our plans and campaigns, or even just requiring a unique way to deal with them. And so that's where we're going to spend some time going through this 4-step process and giving you 3 unique examples within a pandemic, a budget cut, and if you were to have a merger or acquisition. All 3 of these really come into play at different times that you only need to take action at certain points. So for today's discussion, we will go into each of these in more detail. And then we recommend that you always start at step 1 to really evaluate the situation, determine whether action is required or not, and move through each of these steps. So we'll really give very specific examples as we click into each of these.
Hey, Rainey, I'll just say too that, like, you know, I remember when we were going through kind of the dry run and look at this, those 3 examples, pandemic, budget cut, and acquisition are all good ones because everyone can recognize that. It seems like acquisitions continuously, pandemic, everyone's responded to, and no, I would love to meet a marketer who's never faced a budget cut. I don't think I ever have. But I'm really curious from the audience too, just in chat, like what are some other circumstances that have caused you to have to change plans on the fly, right? It could be responding to a market opportunity. It could be changing consumer preferences or customer preferences. It could be the rise of some social movement or something that you have to respond. I'm really curious to hear some examples of that. So, chat them up if you have them. Thank you.
New leadership is in there, and that has its own unique change as well. It will fit into these categories, so I'll try and relate that as we're talking through. The merger and merger acquisition will be combined together, so we'll definitely give some of that. Within new leadership, that one is really rethinking how we want to also message what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how it aligns. And so I think we'll provide some good context for that. Okay, there's quite a few. Is there any ones you want to talk more on, Jim, or just?
No, let's roll ahead. I just think they're really interested. Like, for example, tarnish reputation of featured celebrity in campaign. Ooh, ouch. You don't have to get into all these. You can proceed, but I'm really curious to see some examples. Thank you.
Yeah, it'll be nice to actually, when we do live Q&A, hear from everyone too, and kind of relate those examples, see if we've actually helped to kind of answer some of those specific questions that are top of mind for everyone. So in the very first step, business context, this is really where we're trying to assess what is happening that's causing this disruption, and to what degree is this going to impact the campaigns and programs that we have running, and what would we need to adjust. So you're seeing this model that is really giving us two factors to consider. First is the scope of the disruption in context of your entire campaign. Your entire campaign can be affected by any type of disruption, or is it maybe just a small subset of that? And the other factor to consider is time frame. How long do we expect this disruption to occur? Is it temporary or fleeting? Is this something that's more long lasting and extended? And that if so, your campaign potentially won't achieve the original goals that it had intended. So that's where we want to really kind of place and sort of look at this as to how we want to look at the types of disruption and then judge those next steps. So when we do have something that's more widespread, prolonged, it impacts our business objectives. And so this icon is representing the pandemic. And so it's fair to assume that significant changes will be required to ensure that your campaign still aligns. Most, if not all, markets may be impacted. The impact is going to be lasting for multiple quarters. That's what we thought when we started the pandemic. We are now into year 3, I believe. The magnitude is causing us to revisit our strategies, revisit our business goals, looking at protecting revenue, retention of revenue. So what can we take advantage? Either way, the business objectives have in fact changed. So we would argue that your previous campaign plans cannot remain in the way that they were. We are going to have to reevaluate. On the other end of the scale, this is showing a budget cut, the calculator icon. It originates internally. It's likely to be applied to selected areas and is time-bound in its measurement. In this situation, probably the campaign is likely to still be valid. It's going to have the same theme, targeted to the same markets, to the same audience members. But this means that we have to apply and make sure that we've got some ability to kind of continue the original intention while we're looking at a modified budget. There's also a few other areas that we can take a look at, and we really want to provide analysis to look at different situations. When something is larger, such as a pandemic, we will reevaluate our business context because the company in of itself is changing our business objectives and business goals to meet the new conditions of the market, because it is not temporary and it is more long lasting. With a budget cut, this could impact a set or a smaller function within an organization. So that's where we look at the campaign remaining intact, but certain tactics may change. If you were to have a budget cut of $25,000 or $50,000, you can keep kind of the sense of the overarching umbrella of what was intended, but you may have to look at some of those expensive tactics and rethink that. And that's where there are very specific nuances between these two.
I think that's a really good point, Randy. Like, that first one, the pandemic, it frankly, this sounds so callous to say, but it goes both ways. It's not always there's a pandemic, therefore we need to rethink, retrench, pull back, cut funding, etc. There are so many examples from our customer base, because we've been out on the road talking to a lot of customers. We had an example of a customer that, talk about continuous planning. Their product or their product category is something that every single person purchased immediately during the pandemic and continuously through the pandemic. You can make some guesses about what that might be. In order to accommodate that, they had to consolidate all of their planning, resource management, and finances onto a system that would allow them to do almost daily planning, to try and capture demand, meet up with customer expectations, etc. So if you just think about that, the enormous strain that puts on a marketing organization, and it's what frankly, it's capturing opportunity or demand. Or even another one that's not always negative, like just personal story. One of my friends is one of the largest pet supply distributors in North America. Guess what business increased significantly during a pandemic? People spend big on their pets when they have to stay home. So just it's not always about cuts necessarily,
And to that example, there was no thought about how many people were about to go out and adopt every cat and puppy that existed. And so, you couldn't actually find an animal to adopt at the time. And so you wouldn't have thought of brand new market really opened up opportunity for those who sat within it, but it's just not something that you could have predicted. And it's not necessarily the very first assumption that you would have occurred based on the environment we were in.
Yep, exactly.
Absolutely. Well, we will continue in kind of going through each of these steps. And in step 2, it's really coming back to our audience alignment. This is really assessing, looking at our target buyers and their needs. And we're really asking ourselves, are we still headed in the right direction? I think just on the example that Jim and I were discussing, we couldn't have predicted that there would be a brand new market and audience sort of unfolding in our eyes as the pandemic was occurring. That's just one of many examples, as we're all very familiar with. And so that's immediately looking back at, who are our target buyers? What, in fact, are their primary needs? Are we targeting the same markets and the same buyers? Have those buyer needs changed as a result of what has occurred? And as you can imagine, if either or both of these have changed, the theme and the messaging of the campaign may need to be updated. And so that's where we come back to that campaign framework and that intended larger audience, who we're going after. And you can immediately see messaging will need to change to really associate to the new buyer needs. Reevaluating the markets that we were going after, some of the personas and audiences as we go down will also have changed. And so that really starts to give us some very good context. If we think about a corporate merger or acquisition, it could even be something as your portfolio is about to expand. Your offerings are going to change. You have new markets available to you because of an acquisition. Or maybe it helps you address a new set of buyers and customers with a new offering. This also requires you to revisit the theme and the messaging of the campaign to help draw on those connections. It may not happen at the moment of the merger and acquisition, but there was a reason for the business moving in that direction. And so how does that affect us downstream? What can we be doing in the first 90 days, 180 days to really start to set the tone of where the company is positioning itself based on this M&A and how this market now changes to really sort of address and meet for that need. As we move into the third step, which is our campaign architecture, we really are the managers of our campaign. And once we have assessed and confirmed that we're heading in that right direction, we need to make sure that our campaign is balanced for the journey. And so this is where we're looking at, has the disruption impacted our budget and resources? Can we still afford to do all the activities that we had planned? Depending on the degree to which the business objectives have been impacted, there may be an effect on those marketing budget, and they may need to be applied across different components of the campaign. If the activities are still viable and appropriate, many of us have seen over the last 18 to 24 months, the pandemic has really rendered certain client interactions and programs almost impossible. In-person events, face-to-face meetings as example. So we're now having to really kind of think through that certain tactics may not be as impactful. And that's where we need to make sure that we're changing to reflect the way that buyers are in fact still buying.
Great. Thanks, Rainey. I'm going to go into an example of this notion of a budget cut and the impact that it can have on our day-to-day activity planning. So certainly budget cuts are not a disruption that's new to us. This is something that I would argue any marketer has been faced with multiple times. And frankly, when coming up with your tactic plans and your program plans, oftentimes I think we're coming out of the gate with a plan A, B, and C, understanding that budget cuts are likely. We just may not always have a sense of what the scope of that cut may look like. There's actually a nice comment that I saw come in: budget cuts are like planned estimated disruptions. So perfectly teed up this section for sure. But what this does do on an ongoing basis is it does cause us to rethink our marketing mix and ensure that we are still able to execute programs that are reaching the audiences that are still prioritized for us. And so when we have to look at a budget cut scenario, we definitely want to start by assessing the constraint of the cut. But like Jim had referenced earlier, we also want to look at potential new opportunities. Are there new preferences? Are there new tactics that we could be pivoting to that actually may not always cost more, but we have to start to creatively think about the best way to support our audiences and their needs as we really look at our options for starting to recalibrate our mix. And so when we're looking at the recalibration, we do have to take into account, when we're thinking about a campaign, the fact that there are multiple program families that we'll have to be considering. And depending on the extent of the budget cut, we may have to look at reputation, demand, engagement, as well as enablement, or we may have to actually just focus in on one area. And so when I'm thinking about this from a demand perspective, I'm really going to want to go into more detail about what the impact of a budget cut may be as I'm considering that reduction and also looking at the context of these overall campaign goals. So this is a nice example where we'll drill into a little bit more detail. This shows the campaign architecture, and this is going to drill down into the North American region. For those of you that were in the last session that was hosted by our colleague Marcia, you may remember the notion of the campaign plan on a page. This is essentially a more articulated view of what that could look like. And when we're considering the impact of a budget reduction, we'll start with our program families, and then we'll start to want to look at our options for potentially rebalancing the different programs within them. Let's go to the next slide, please. So let's take a look at some of the specific programs within these families and some of the tactics that we had already thought about that we wanted to include as part of this program. So as we had said earlier, tactics are always aimed at a defined audience. And when we're looking at tactics, we want to combine them together into an integrated tactic mix. And when we do this, we are doing this so that we can achieve a quantifiable goal. So from a demand program perspective, these quantifiable goals are anchored around acquisition, validation, or acceleration. And so let's take an example. If we're looking at program 3, for example, let's say that that program is meant to acquire 300 new logos, which would be a demand-oriented goal. And so as we're starting to look at our tactic mix, we'll need to consider both the offer. So as an example, an ebook is an offer, as well as the delivery mechanism or channel. So that could be paid media or an email. And when you're thinking about the impact of a budget cut, you may have to start to get a little bit creative with how you are thinking about your offer and your delivery pairings. If you had planned to invest in some more expensive delivery channels, if you hadn't already committed those dollars, that could be an area where you look to potentially make adjustments or pull back or even shift some of that investment into a different delivery channel. And the other thing that you're going to want to do, so if we're looking at our demand program mix, in this example, we're looking at programs 3 and programs 4 in this visual, you might be having to make some choices around, am I going to invest more in my new buyer acquisition program, or am I going to continue to invest in my upsell program and perhaps redirect investments? And ultimately, the thing that we want to be able to look at is the fact that we're evaluating these different programs and we're evaluating them against a set of success metrics that we have to make sure align to our investment. And so one of the things that you'll be making choices around, again, depending on the level of the potential budget cut, if you are having to orient more towards customer marketing, you may decide to double down on your upsell or cross-sell programs versus some of the more expensive programs around new acquisition. So these are just some of the questions that you can start to really ask yourself as you're assessing your program mix. The other thing that I will add is, as a marketer, you're always balancing this notion of your plan and even contractual considerations that have to be accounted for. If you have already committed to a content syndication program, or you have an ongoing paid media program where you don't have as much flexibility, then those are going to be areas that you can't necessarily make adjustments to now, but may have to consider longer term. And I'll pause, Jim. I feel like you have a question here.
My video comes on suddenly. Yeah, no, there was a question that was actually in the chat, which is an interesting question, but it might need more context. Which and it says, how do you separate a low lift versus a high lift media plan? Not sure if that's related to plan on the page, or how you organize it, or much more how you measure it. But just thought I'd throw it out there, Aaron. I'm not sure.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I might appreciate a little bit more context. Organize it. Low lift versus high lift media plan. How would I organize it? Sorry, Shantae. I would love maybe a little bit more context and specifically what you're getting at there. Low budget versus higher budget. So yes, so that's a good question. And one of the things that you're going to be balancing, and with a media plan, this is actually an area where it can be complex as far as the dollars that are already committed against a bigger plan. So if you have a higher budget media plan that has a longer commit date, you may not even have the ability to make adjustments to some of those, right? So that's where, as I was just mentioning, some of the contractual obligations that need to be considered, even in an instance where you may have a high budget, perhaps longer term media investment that you have committed to that you would like to make adjustments to, sometimes that may not be a choice that you have, right? There's certainly conversations that can be pursued with that agency and other areas, but I know I have personally found myself in scenarios where I wish I had not necessarily had my dollars tied up in a particular way, but I simply didn't have the ability to make an adjustment there. So then I had to look at my plan B or plan C to start to understand if there were some other levers that I could start to pull just based on the new budget, the new goals, and even changes to the audience that we were considering. So hopefully that helps a bit. Jem, anything else on your mind?
Nope, that is exactly what Shantae wanted to know. So, good job.
Well, great. And let's go to the next slide. That was actually a nice little entree into the budget discussion, right? So as we start to assess these choices and our tactic investments that we may have to make adjustments to, we have to look at our budget. And it's a two-pronged approach. So there's a top-down and a bottoms-up approach. And this is really looking at the top-down allocation, where we're starting at that highest level campaign, and we start to fill in the details around our quarterly budgets. So that's part one. But then if we go to the next slide, this is really part two, which is about meeting our top-down versus the bottoms-up. And so as we're looking at the bottom, right, these are looking at our tactics. Our tactics are ultimately aligned to our programs, again, that have a specific objective, which we can measure. And when we're starting to adjust our tactic investment choices, we also have to think about the impact on the budget, but also the goals. And these have to start to get married together, right? So it also can get a little bit more complex, obviously, for global organizations where we have regional budgets, we have different BUs, we have to align our geos. And so depending on the scope of the budget cut, for example, there's going to have to be a collaboration, review cycles, and assessments as to how that is going to ultimately roll up and impact that overall campaign budget. And the other piece that does add complexity, which I'm sure many of you are dealing with, it is super common for a program leader to have multiple programs running that are supporting a single campaign at the same time. These programs will have varying timelines. They will have varying contracts and contractual obligations. And so one of the ways that you can think about simplifying that is from a planning perspective, really take more of a monthly view, both from your budget allocation and also the expected results, to really try to normalize and make sense of the madness of all of these different programs that are running, so that you can start to then ultimately roll those back up to that top level budget view. Jem, I see you have a question.
I do not. But someone smart in our audience asked a question, which I think is relevant here. And the question is, what would be the optimal point between the level of business goals and marketing budget? It might not be that simple to find a certain place. However, any scientific work on this, you're trying to find maybe that altitude of connecting business goals to the budget itself, and the best way to do that.
So that's a good question, and there's not a one size fits all answer. When you're looking at the business goals and you're looking at where you have the highest level of expected impact from a program perspective, the recommendation would be to certainly anchor around those programs that you think are ultimately going to get you as close as possible to that business objective. If you are planning programs that maybe you haven't run before, you don't have any historical data around performance measures, or even just from a confidence perspective, maybe if you're confronted with a budget cut, this might not be an area of investment that you want to focus on. That could be more low-hanging fruit that you could make an adjustment around. Rainey, I don't know if you have anything to add on that topic at all.
It definitely goes back to where the 4-step process, which is in business context. So anytime the business goals have changed, before marketers pivot, we really want to make sure that we're aligning to our marketing leader. So based on those business objectives, how is overall marketing and our marketing leader sort of resetting that tone and expectations? Because without that same amount of money or investment to make, that means we're naturally going to be changing our goals within marketing. And that means our measurement will also change. And so that will have a rolling effect all the way down to that tactic level. So, it's important not to move too quickly and make sure that the alignment between business, marketing leader, and the rest of the marketing team is clearly understood, that when something happens at a very top level, that marketing is stepping forward from a leadership perspective to say, here's what we will do, here's what we won't do, so we can appropriately then reset our thinking for that.
Thanks, Rainey. And that's actually a great segue to our next slide, which is all about aligning our execution, right? So we've talked about the program mix. We've talked about how we can think about some of the tactic changes that we might be making as a result of a budget cut. But now we have to examine, is the expected performance changing at the campaign level? Are we delivering something that's different? Are we delivering more of something or less of something? What are the new activities or the revised set of activities? And are there a different set of participants? And when we're thinking about this, we of course then have to roll it up to this notion of campaign ROI, our revised program goals, and also our tactic effectiveness. And so as you think about revising your tactics and your programs, you're going to still want to be focused on that campaign ROI view of the world from a measurement perspective, because over time, your campaign ROI trending is going to be a significant metric that will help to validate the decisions that you made, right? So as you're making adjustments, you want to make sure that you're still supporting that top line goal of the campaign, even if that goal had ultimately changed. The other piece of this is that you want to be able to track your results consistently, because this will help you as you're making future investment decisions. So having that line of sight into longer term results and performance is going to help you to continue to iterate and make choices as your plans continue to evolve. And then certainly, when we're talking about aligned execution, we have to have communications. So keeping your key stakeholders in the boat as part of this revised planning process, continuing to set expectations as goals are changing, as plans are changing. It's an ongoing drumbeat of setting expectations, communicating, and also creating open forums for people to ask questions about, why did you make this decision? Why are we going to be proceeding in this way? And just really making sure that you're keeping people in the boat with you. So now we've talked about how to think about adjustments within our campaign architecture. We've talked about aligned execution, and Rainey is going to bring it back all together into this notion of a campaign hub and how we can continue to use this 4-step process as we're monitoring performance and continuing to be agile in our planning.
Thanks, Erin. And as we've recommended throughout this process, always start at step 1 and really evaluate each step to ensure that you're taking the appropriate action based on the disruption that you're experiencing. When something as major as a pandemic, everything needs to be reevaluated. And so that's where the business context, our objectives, our business goals have all changed. And that's required a cascading effect through all of these steps. With something as an acquisition, this may be more moderate, so that we may be looking at, there could be some business context happening, but it may not really impact us in year 1. It may have changes in year 2. Looking at a budget cut, that can tend to be a more minor disruption and really be part of the tactics as part of that program mix inside of that campaign architecture. And so it's really important to evaluate at each step. You don't necessarily always need to go to step 1, but start with that process of really relaying, what type of disruption do I have? Because it gives you a different starting point within each of these 4 steps as a place to start, reevaluate, and then determine what action needs to be taken. We've also put together another helpful slide in thinking about some of the considerations you should have at each step to kind of help you process other examples that we did not include today. And so for any change that occurs, you are really well prepared with the tools and skills, review your business objectives and marketing goals, ensure that your campaigns are speaking to the right audiences or if new segments should be considered. If any program family mix within reputation, demand, customer engagement needs to be adjusted, look to that. I would even argue within a pandemic, most of us may have been doing more demand, net new logos and acquisition programs, and we were pivoting to more customer engagement and retention programs to ensure those revenue objectives. And then really consider how you approach communicating and enabling teams. Depending on where that adjustment is, we do need to reset expectations, as Erin has stated, whether it's to our sales organization, field marketing organization, across, up, over, out. Recognize that when you started the year or a particular quarter with a plan, that if you are resetting something, it potentially is changing the effectiveness of a program or a campaign. Your goals may have changed within that. And as you readjust, you want to reset those expectations accordingly within each of those team members. So this is where we start to kind of conclude and sort of bring that back around. There are so many different forms of disruption. Monitor your marketing environment and really leverage that 4-step process as your campaign hub to stay focused and aligned. When larger changes occur in the company, start to conduct that gap analysis and understand where you should realign with an action or no action based on each of those 4 steps. Having a formal campaign process is so helpful to prioritize actions. So really thinking through how all those programs align to a campaign and how to work with your sales and product leaders to ensure that you're all working together to those same initiatives. And use your data to really draw those insights and make informed decisions. With that, I will hand it back over to Jim and the team.
Great, thank you so much, Rainey and Erin. It's fantastic. It's really, really good stuff. I've been watching some of the chit chat and some of the questions, and clearly you have hit the mark with the discussion about this. There is some Q&A here, and I want to make sure we get to it. Some really good questions. Before we jump into that, just a couple of reminders. Again, if you are interested in a product walkthrough, very quick, about 15 minutes on how we enable continuous planning and connect plans to financial management, to reporting on outcomes, and then stick around on the webinar, don't log off, and Jan Kublowski at Brandmaker will do that in just a couple minutes. Other quick reminder, love hearing from experts at Forrester. Thank you. You guys have such a great perspective on this. You got all the frameworks and the plans and maturity models and everything else. For those of us who are not experts and had to figure this out through our career, but one way or another, and you might want to also check out our upcoming series where you learn from your peers, learn from practitioners. How different people approach the planning itself, and specifically staying agile over the last couple of years. How do they make those adjustments? What do they learn? Where they struggle? Where do they succeed, etc. Stick around for those. We don't have dates right now. They'll happen in early April, and we'll be publishing them on our website. So just 2 calls to action. Let's go to, there's a couple of questions in here right now that I think, and Rainey, Erin, you could certainly help us out with. The first was from Stephanie. She says, what is your perspective on ROI when there was a longer sales cycle, i.e. 12 to 18 months, and the program spend has spanned multiple years? How can marketers get their arms around that?
I think both Erin and I are probably going to tackle this one. When we get into thinking of programs and demand programs specifically, because that's really where demand teams are aligned with sales in these longer term sales cycles. That's where we really look at kind of those initiatives and objectives within demand to acquire, to accelerate. And so you naturally, as a demand marketer, would have different types of programs depending on the stages within the sales cycle. So if someone is starting to show interest and is in fact moving into an opportunity stage, but they're in a very early on, that's really where sales and marketing need to have that conversation of, yes, we would like, the marketing team to keep a certain level of communication and light engagement, but this is where we as a sales organization really need to address some of the buyer needs to kind of push them into that next steps. So helping to really align on what are the objectives of your program, because not everything is top of waterfall or top of funnel. Sometimes we're in a mid state trying to create engagement and keep that activity. Other times we're in a pipeline acceleration program, and those programs should be timed based on a longer spanned sales cycle.
That's exactly right, Rainey. And the way that I would also think about it from a program owner perspective is by having these different kinds of programs, the activate, validate, accelerate with really specific objectives that will also help to keep you as a marketer on track for these interim stages of progression, even if you do have a long sales cycle. If you have a 12 or 18-month sales cycle, there's still a ton of opportunity, of course, early stage, mid stage, later stage, to be investing in programs that are supporting this entire movement of the buying group forward. And you will really start to understand as you are using your waterfall diagnostics and have an understanding of what that velocity should look like, whether or not these programs are helping to accelerate or to move through at the pace that you would normally expect to be seen there. So great question. And certainly we would love to be able to support you in thinking about your activation, validation, acceleration programs.
Great. Thank you. There's another question here, which I just love. I like it so much that I'm going to append my question to it. But Brian says, first of all, he says, this is great. He says, do you have a recommended way to resource this internally, i.e. like internal resources specifically dedicated to planning, or is it generally built into people's day jobs? And I'm going to append to that, where does the responsibility for this type of planning sit in a modern marketing organization? Is this part of marketing operations? Is this in the office of the CMO? Is this somewhere else? Is it democratized through the entire organization? So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts.
Typically, campaign planning is at a centralized or global function and is a unique group of people. Not always, it really depends on the size of the company, but campaign planning wouldn't start until the business objectives have been stated, the marketing strategy has been built, and a marketing plan against that. Then the campaign planning would take place, which is really where this kind of clips on to part one of this series, because then it's clearly understood holistically as a company and as a marketing department what we're trying to do and where we're trying to go. For campaign planning, there typically is a campaign leader, but they are working across product and sales functions to bring them into the conversation, to validate what audiences and markets do we want to go after and prioritize. What are some of those key buyer needs against those personas? Content marketing is part of the process to make sure that they're creating some of those core messages that are needed. And anyone in a program planning function, that can be a demand marketer, it can be a communications person of reputation, it could be field marketing, it could be regional, it could be global. Those team members are part of the process, because as the campaign plans get formed and those larger themes are created, again, intended for that 12, 18, 24-month cycle, we all have different roles to participate in and then take action against that. And the programs can be shorter, and that's where it moves within the organization, and why you are seeing reputation, demand, customer engagement, and enablement. Those are all discrete functions within our companies. And so we really want to think through what are the best teams to partner with to holistically recognize that while we work within a particular sub-function or department of marketing, together, all of the programs that we're doing tie back up to those bigger initiatives, because those campaign goals are going to move and map to that marketing strategy and plan and impact where the company revenue is growing.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you. I think there was one more. We got room for one more question, although it's like 3 minutes at this point. So Oh, looks like I lost that question. Oh, here, it was in Q&A. Sorry, it was in chat. It says, actually, it was an answer to a question. My bad. It wasn't even a question. I thought it was a question. My bad. It was John helping out with some additional context to an earlier question. So thank you for that, which is good. We're at the top of the hour anyway. And I think this has been a very in-depth discussion about planning and make adjustments to planning with tons of insights. I really appreciate Rainey, Aaron, you guys bringing your expertise to the conversation. Again, I'll say that a lot of marketers, myself included, didn't go through a formal education on how to think about planning, much less how to adjust plans on the fly or bring these architectures. So it's great. It's great hearing from the experts. Thank you again for participating. At this point, I'm just going to encourage folks, if they would like to stay on and see a quick solution overview, solution walkthrough on how BrandMaker connects the act of planning to financial management, to execution, to reporting in a system, they can please stay on. And Jan here is joined. Thank you, Jan. And we'll provide like a 15-minute overview, which we can check out. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate you joining us. We will send out recording. And I wish everyone a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jan, take it away.
Beautiful. Thank you. Rainey, Aaron, I just got to say thank you. That was awesome. Amazing insights there. I'm going to do my best to carry the baton and finish us here with a glimpse into Allocadia, which is a specific platform that sits within the BrandMaker family. And we're really going to keep driving this theme home today. Things change, right? The world changes. We have to adjust. That's life. That's business. We're going to really keep that theme going as we take a bit of a cheeky peek into the Allocadia platform. Now, Rainey, you had mentioned something that kind of resonated, the importance of data to make informed decisions, right? If we're pivoting, we're changing things, plans are adjusting, we need the right data to inform our decisions. And that's where we're going to start here. Today, we're going to be looking at a fictitious business, Donnybrook Technologies. We'll be going on a bit of a journey in terms of how they transformed their marketing organization to be more agile, to be able to pivot, to have great insights into plans and spend and the performance of that spend. And where we're starting with Allocadia today is our insight section. That is that core concept, having the data at your fingertips in an automated fashion to support the need to change and pivot. We're starting with a very simple view, an example dashboard that helps a business keep track of their plans. What are our targets? What are we working with from finance budgets? And of that, how much have we planned? How much have we accounted for? How much have we budgeted amongst our campaigns and programs and tactics? Being able to look at the business through different dimensions, zoom and enhance on any division within the business that you need to focus on the various budgets that exist within your marketing org, being able to see how plans are shaping up and who's struggling and who is doing well. But really importantly here, around plans, being able to get more granular, not just high-level numbers, but how do our plans actually break down? Already today's discussion brought up so many, just introduced this concept of a complex matrix, right? Segments, personas, activity types, being able to break down plans and immediately see how much are we planning to spend on enterprise currently for marketing versus our mid-market audience, on direct marketing versus content marketing versus advertising, on the personas that marketing markets to, the products and solutions that you actually market. All important dimensions, so critical that we have the data at our fingertips to break down plans in a meaningful way. Going beyond plans, being able to have access to data around how we're tracking against those plans. Now we're actually spending money, right? We're getting campaigns out into market. We're committing dollars. We're actually spending dollars. Now it becomes a question of how well can we track our plans as we execute them. Let's select the specific team that we're going to be focusing on today as we dive into Allocadia, this North American team. What is their budget and how are they landing against it? How are they tracking based on everything they're currently forecasting with their plans, everything that is currently committed in their purchase orders, and everything that's already been spent? It's been invoiced and recognized by finance. being able to quickly see who's on budget, who's over, who's under, so that you can pivot accordingly. And furthermore, all of those important dimensions, not just for plans, but for tracking spend. Why are we overspending on direct marketing? And why are we underspending on events? Being able to get more granular with spend. And finally, what we'll get to today in the demo is this idea of marketing outcomes. Great that we've got a grasp of our plans. We can track our spend, but are we able to understand the impact that our budgets and our plans that we're executing are actually having? So today we'll also show you how Allocadia can integrate with downstream systems to bring in performance metrics. How much money have we actually spent as an organization on various channels, various campaigns, or within specific divisions? That money spent, what is it actually generating us? Data coming in directly from something like a CRM to say the money you're spending is tied to campaigns and opportunities and pipeline that has thus far generated you this much either pipeline or closed-won revenue. Where does that leave us against our targets? Starting to empower organizations with the data they need to start getting better at attribution modeling. All of this is what the insight section is about. It's about having data at your fingertips. So great, we've got some dashboards, we've got some reports. They're there to help us plan, pivot, and make the right decisions. How do we get to this though? How do these numbers just magically appear in these dashboards? So what we're going to look at over the next few minutes is how Donnybrook Technologies specifically moved away from an old world where plans were caught up in things like spreadsheets, PowerPoint, Google Sheets, personal trackers, plus all the stuff that was coming in from finance around spend, plus all the stuff that the analytics team had around ROI. How do we bring those data sets together to really create a streamlined planning, budgeting, and execution process? Well, let's take a look at where Donnybrook once started. Some simple visuals to help us tell the story a little bit here. Funnily enough, the root of Donnybrook's problems back in the day was this. There was no organization. Budgets, plans, and spend were all managed in disparate spreadsheets that were disconnected, unstandardized, and really difficult to roll up throughout the organization to make informed and, really importantly, timely decisions. So first thing we'll be looking at today is how Allocadia helps a business shift away from kind of that chaos of spreadsheets and introduces very much a hierarchical structure to this entire planning process. Who are the teams that exist within marketing? What are the budgets? What are their functions? Let's bring a system in place that brings this to life and empowers these teams with their own unique online standardized workspaces. We'll have a look at this in a bit more detail today. So let's get into the platform and show you what this looks like. I'm going to start right here on the Home tab. This is basically the entry point into the Allocadia platform. Where we had disconnected spreadsheets, we want to understand the structure of an organization and set up a hierarchy that suits your marketing org. For Donnybrook, that meant understanding the various divisions that existed within marketing, within their corporate group, the multiple teams and budgets that exist no longer live in a spreadsheet. They now have online workspaces where these marketing teams can manage those plans and manage that spend. If we look at field marketing, broken down into regions, we have North America as its own region. We're going to look at this team and really focus on their journey today. Now, we've brought in a hierarchy, no more spreadsheets. We can start getting users into the platform with the right levels of permission. We can help facilitate global teams that need to plan and track spend in local currencies. We're simply setting up an online solution that suits how your business is actually structured and how it operates. From there, the fun can begin. We've set you up. Let's now show you how Allocadia actually behaves throughout, the role it plays within any marketing organization. Really think of it as a translation layer between both marketing and finance. Fundamentally, around planning, it's as simple as giving marketing and finance a place where budgets can be cleanly allocated and tracked, and give marketing a place that is purpose-built to manage plans. No more spreadsheets. At any level of this hierarchy, finance is able to effectively allocate budgets in various ways, whether it's monthly, quarterly, annually, different budget pots, all those things taken care of. So finance can easily allocate budgets across the entire marketing org. And then those teams if I jump into this North American workspace, now have an online workspace where they have clear and clean, always up-to-date visibility into what is my budget, what am I working with, and a simple grid, which is meant to replace Excel to manage their plans. Here now, they can start to think about, what am I actually going to be executing? All of those things discussed today, those campaign themes, the programs and tactics that sit within, the money side can all be managed here. I'm running certain events. Within this webinar, here are my expenses. This summer campaign at the end of the year, I'm simply placeholding funds, a simple grid to build out our plans. Now, what's really important, and this is going to feed into the reporting we saw, is standardizing data inputs. This webinar, well, in this case, the data that this business wants to capture is that this webinar is a demand creation activity. It's marketing to our American region. It's actually an event activity type, and as a subset to that, it's a digital event. The products we're marketing as part of this webinar are these three, even split. Really simple concept, but we are standardizing data input around plans across the entire organization. Step number one is standardization, because this is what's going to ultimately empower all of those dashboards we saw at the start. How do we roll up data in an automated way so that data is at your fingertips? Well, it starts with good, clean data sets in. From here, it's around aligning to objectives. We've already discussed that importance of, if we're going to pivot, we need to understand how the money we're investing is helping us achieve certain goals throughout the business. Well, right here in Allocadia, I can select any campaign, any tactic, and very quickly align it to the strategic objectives the business has laid out for me. Right here, connect to any of those objectives, add, and I'm done. This is my way of basically saying these plans that I want to execute align to these objectives. All of these objectives laid out for me right here on the strategy tab by marketing leadership. Capture objectives, allow marketers to connect to these. So important, because now your strategic objectives, your KPIs, your OKRs, they too become a new data point that you can build reports and dashboards around. So important if we want to be able to pivot money, budget, in alignment to strategic objectives. All right, we're cooking with gas here. We're planning in an online solution. It's standardized. We've got good, clean data sets in. What about the spend data? Once we start executing and we start committing dollars and actually spending dollars, where does that come into the equation? Well, this is where Allocadia really aligns with the finance systems in place. Donnybrook Technologies, they leverage Coupa for their purchase orders. So Allocadia, in this case, is integrated with Coupa to streamline the purchase order process. I raise a PO directly from Allocadia. The procurement process stays the same. But as I do that, a little ID is injected. This little ID being injected into a purchase management process, really important, because now, regardless of what finance technology you're using, we have a little ID that's injected, which allows us to sync data back from your finance systems via simple, secure transfer, simple CSVs, a list of purchase orders, a list of invoices coming into Allocadia, allowing us to automate the reconciliation of commits and actuals against those budgets and plans that we were just working in. So if I dive back into the system, let's see what that looks like. Planning season's done. I've completed my plans. They could have been approved and locked down. Since it's now Q1, I'm going to switch to a Q1 investment tracking view. What's changed here now is that I have additional visibility. I have a commit column, which is being fed by Coupa purchase orders, and I have an actual column, which in this case is being fed by invoices coming from SAP. I, as a marketer, simply keep my plans up to date. As I go to execute on any purchase order, simple outbound actions, which can do things like create campaign objects in other systems, create projects and work and project management tools, or in this case, allow me to generate a purchase requisition into Coupa. I've raised a PO. Allocadia has automatically injected a little ID that lives as part of every line within every tactic and campaign. That ID is injected. Quite simply now, we are receiving flat files from these systems. A list of POs comes in. Allocadia says, okay, here are some new purchase orders. These amounts, these dates with this ID. It is able to then granularly reconcile committed amounts against the most granular line automatically. As invoices come in, Allocadia will say this invoice was cut from this PO. That PO had that ID. That ID lines up with this CXO kits line and will automatically update the actuals. This means we are reconciling committed and actual spend at the most granular levels of your plans, meaning you can now roll that data up to a campaign level, or to a program level, to a campaign or channel level, to an entire budget level. Now, Allocadia is here to constantly track and recalculate exactly how much budget is left. So critical to have that visibility if you're thinking about making changes and pivoting. What budget do we have left to work with? Let's now make smart decisions around where to pivot it. Data is coming in around commits and actuals. That is what was fueling the investment tracking summaries. Allocadia is the budgets and the plans. Your finance tools are the source of truth for spend. Let's align those data sets so you know of your budget, how much are you forecasting, how much are you committing, how much have you actually spent, what have you got left to work with from a monetary perspective. Then comes the final portion. Great that we've got a grasp of our plans and our budgets and we can track our spend. There is also capability to sync data direct from digital channels to provide digital pacing, such an important portion, especially in today's digital world. But this final optimized piece is all around now connecting this beautiful investment data set to downstream systems, very commonly marketing automation or CRM tools. If this is where our campaign performance data lives, and Allocadia now has a grasp of all of our spend data, let's marry the two. Quite simply, within Allocadia, marketers have the capabilities now to align elements of their budgets and plans with campaigns or objects in other systems, in this case, Salesforce. Very quickly, I can align this element within Allocadia with this campaign in Salesforce. Two things can happen right there. One, Allocadia aggregates spend data and keeps Salesforce up to date. Two, we're bringing Salesforce performance data into Allocadia, fueling some of those dashboards we were looking at earlier around pipeline and performance. The concept here is simple. Allocadia acting as this translation layer, a tool purpose-built to manage these challenges around the complexities and the matrices that exist within marketing, connecting all of these data sources to give a source of truth around marketing plans, budgets, spend, and performance. That data set available for reporting within the dashboards that we've been looking at today, an embedded BI, or available for export to use in your own BI tools as you need to. Very, very quick look into Allocadia today, but hopefully that was at least a little bit of a sneak peek to give you an idea of how connecting these different data sources in a very logical, progressive way here allows us now to have a better grasp of what's going on with our budgets and plans, empowering us to make better decisions as and when we need to pivot. Thanks everyone for listening.
That's a great overview. That's a
Back to you,
great
Jim.
overview. Thank you. It's a lot of concepts to get across in 15 minutes with a good dose of product walkthrough. So good job. For those of you who stuck around, thank you. If you are interested in learning more on personalized demonstration, etc., I'd encourage you to just go to the website, Brandmaker or Allocadia's website, and just fill out a form and we'll schedule a one-on-one demonstration with you. And if you're lucky, might even be with you on. So please do that. To the rest of you, thank you very much. Again, appreciate you sticking around. I wish you the best day, the best year moving forward, and hope we all plan smart and pivot fast. So thank you.